Welcome back to F1 Brake Check, where the engines roar louder than your neighbor's lawnmower at 7 a.m. and the drama is juicier than a Hulu docuseries. Today, we're heading to a place where Formula One history isn't just made, it's burned into the tarmac. Buckle up because we're taking a high-octane tour of Imola, officially known as the Autodromo Internazionale Enzo e Dino Ferrari. But let's be honest, that's a mouthful. We just call it Imola.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
We're back with F1 Brake Check. My name is Scott Vick. I am one of your intrepid hosts, and with me, as always, is my pundit for life, my ride or die, my brother in arms, Mr. Corey Broom. Corey, how you doing this week, sir?
Good. It's good to be back in the States. I'm just fighting a cold now. So other than that, how about you? How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. It's all things considered. It's been kind of a rough couple of weeks. I mean, both for both of us, with travel and work and everything else. That's why we missed last week's episode. So for that, we apologize, but we're gonna make up for it this week.
Right on.
All right. So shall we get going?
Yeah.
All right. Imola isn't your average modern stadium circuit with perfect runoffs and generous track limits. No, sir. Imola is old school. It's narrow. It's fast. It's unforgiving. And it bites hard. Located in the rolling hills of Emilia-Romagna in northern Italy, Imola is not just a racetrack. It's a cathedral of speed and sorrow, a place steeped in triumph and in tragedy. It opened in 1953 and made its Formula One debut in 1980, hosting what was then called the Italian Grand Prix before Monza took back its crown the following year. But F1 liked it so much they gave it its own race, the San Marino Grand Prix, named after the nearby microstate to make the calendar look a little more international. The layout, 4.9 kilometers of high-speed straights, sweeping elevation changes, and a series of brutal corners that ask the drivers simply one question: how brave are you? How big are your cojones? You've got Tamburello, once a flat-out left-hander, now chicaned for safety, but still terrifying in its own right. The Villeneuve, named after the great Gilles Villeneuve, who gave us speed, style, and sheer audacity. Then it's on to the technical double apex Tosa hairpin, the fast flick of Acquire Minerali, and the lung-busting uphill charge the Variante Alta. Oh, and let's not forget Ravazza, a double left-hander that has ruined more laps than an untimely yellow flag. But to talk about Imola is to speak of 1994, the darkest weekend in Formula One history. Friday, Rubens Barrichello crashes violently at Variante Bossa. He survives, but the black cloud that hangs over the track was a harbinger of what was to come for the weekend. Saturday, Roland Ratzenberger, a young Australian hopeful, loses his life in a crash at Villeneuve. Sunday, Ayrton Senna, the three-time world champion, the magician of Monaco, the master of wet weather, was ripped from this mortal coil. Taking Tamburello at full throttle, Senna's car left the track and slammed violently into the barrier. The world stood still. The sport changed forever, and Imola was never the same again. Safety was overhauled. Tamburello was reprofiled, which, ironically, would have probably pissed off Senna. But the ghosts still whisper through the trees lining the circuit. Every time Formula One returns here, you feel it. There's a reverence in the paddock, a moment of silence, and a glance to the sky. But don't let that shadow fool you. Imola also delivers the kind of racing that makes grown adults scream at their TVs. Fast forward to 2020 when F1 returned to Imola after a 14-year absence thanks to the reshuffled COVID calendar. The drama was instant. Lewis Hamilton executed a masterclass in strategy, extending his first stint on aging tires like he was weaving magic, and clinched a stunning win. His teammate Valtteri Bottas, who had started on pole, collected more debris than a Roomba and dropped back, while Daniel Ricciardo took a surprise podium and gave us a shoey, much to the horror of every germaphobe on the planet. 2021, chaos. Max Verstappen and Hamilton clashed metaphorically and physically, with Lewis sliding into the gravel only to pull off a miraculous recovery to P2. George Russell and Bottas had their infamous high-speed crash, cue Toto Wolff angrily throwing headphones. And then 2022, the first ever Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix held with fans in full attendance since the pandemic. Verstappen dominated, Ferrari floundered at their home track, and Charles Leclerc spun trying to chase second place, throwing away valuable points. The Tifosi, watching in heartbreak, probably spilled their espresso in frustration. So what makes Imola so dramatic? It's the layout. Tight and twisty, with minimal overtaking zones, demanding nothing less than perfection. It's the weather, famously unpredictable, where a sunny start can turn into a monsoon by lap 12. It's the history. You're not just racing here, you're racing with the ghost of F1 legends on your shoulders. Even pit lane is dramatic. It's the second longest one in Formula One, and with a speed limit of just 60 kilometers per hour, pit stops here are strategic make or break moments. Add to that the passionate Italian fans, draped in scarlet and waving Ferrari flags. It's like a national holiday. And you've got an atmosphere that's more gladiator arena than racetrack. So as we look back on another Imola weekend, remember, this isn't just a race. It's a test of character. It's a circuit that demands everything and forgives nothing.
That's so true. You're off just by a little bit. I mean, this last race, how many people we see like some serious crashes, some serious wrecks?
Yes.
And these aren't
Yes, very
slouches.
much
These
so.
are really good drivers, so it definitely is not forgiving.
No, no, it is absolutely one of the most demanding tracks, and it demands that you be just inch perfect because again, this is another one of those tracks that it's like I've never driven it in real life, but I've driven literally hundreds of hours in various simulators on this track, and it is such a demanding track. And because it's like because like I was speaking about earlier, the elevation changes are one of the things that really catches a lot of people out, because this is probably, with the exception of maybe Spa, there is no other track on the Formula One calendar where the elevation changes are so dramatic,
Hmm.
because it's like you go up the hill, you go up the hill to the Variante Alta, and you hit that last corner, and then it immediately drops. It's an immediately, it's a quick left, right, and then another really long, fast right. But you hit the top of the hill, and then you're going back down, and you drop down almost as far as what you came up before you make that fast sweeper, and you're right back up the hill. So I mean, it's just up and down. I mean, it's like a friggin' roller coaster, and it is just an amazing track. It really is. It's just, to me, there is very few, tracks that are like Imola. And
Yeah.
it's like, if rumors are to believe that we might be losing it, it's going to be a very, very sad day for Formula One.
Yeah, because there's talk of it, right? It's gonna
Yeah,
be going away.
there's a very good possibility that this may have been the last one, because the
Yeah.
contract has not been renewed, and I know that they're trying. There's so many with 24, races on the schedule. It's trying to, and they've got so many other places that are vying
Yeah.
for a spot on the calendar, that it's going to be one of those things where it's like you're gonna something's going to have to give. And because even though Imola produces some of the best racing, it's probably one of the best tracks in Formula One. It's probably also, because of its, location, everything, it's probably, not as big a money maker as, some place like Miami or
Sure.
Monza or Silverstone. So it's like this may be one of the ones that winds up on the chopping block because of that. But I'm hopeful that at the very least they can do something kind of like what they've done with Spa, where they might, maybe switch off, maybe every other year, so that way we
Yeah.
can still kind of keep it around. But maybe, in order to open up a slot for someplace else, like the ones that they're talking about, like in Africa or someplace like that, that maybe, they can do something like that, like what they've done with Spa. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Time will tell.
Right. Right.
All right. So with that said, It is time for us to move on to what is absolutely my favorite part of the week. So, as most of you know, I am a longtime Formula One fan. I've been following the sport since the mid 80s. I have seen, the sport and, I've seen drivers come and go. I've seen the sport change. And Corey, who is somewhat of a newer fan, but who is just as passionate about the sport as I am. So each week, Corey will come up with a series of trivia questions to test my very small mental acuity in our section that we call Stump the Pundit. So, Corey, what do you have for me this week?
I looked at your history, and I thought, well, why not give some trivia around Imola? I know you know the track really well, so I'm not expecting to get too much out of here, but we'll see if I can stump you a couple times at least.
All right.
So,
Sounds good. Let's go.
starting out, who was the first driver that won the first race ever held at Imola in 1980?
Oh, that was just shortly before I started following Formula One, but I want to say, I don't know why, but I want to say it was Prost, but I don't think that that's right.
No, it's Piquet.
Oh, Nelson Piquet.
Yep, yep.
All right. 0 for 1. Let's go.
All right. Um, what year did Imola return to Formula One under a new name?
Like I said, in the history, that would have been 2020
Yep,
during the
yep,
COVID
exactly.
years.
Yeah. Which team scored its first F1 victory at Imola when it returned to F1 in 2020?
That would be Mercedes.
Yep, Lewis Hamilton. Yeah, won.
Yes. Okay.
And that's it for Stump the Pundit.
All right, fantastic. That's fun as always. So thank you, Corey. All right, so let's take and jump into our news and rumors, et cetera, et cetera. So first of all, like I said, because of scheduling conflicts and travel and things like that, we were not able to do an episode last week after to recap Miami. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take and we're going to do a quick recap, but we're just going to hit the highest of highlights. So, number one, sprint qualifying. Kimi Antonelli, who both you and I last season, when they named him as the replacement for the outgoing Lewis Hamilton when he moved over to Ferrari, you and I both said that this kid was going to flame out spectacularly. And
Stupid decision.
I honestly think that we could not have been
Oh,
more wrong because
100%.
I'm sorry?
I said 100%. Absolutely right.
Yes. So he stormed to an absolutely brilliant pole position for the sprint race. So his first pole in Formula One was at Miami during the sprint race. Now, unfortunately, he made a little error during the sprint race and ended up finishing, I believe it was either fourth or fifth that day. But still, just the raw speed that this kid has is and how quickly he is adapting to the jump from F2 to F1.
Oh yeah,
is just nothing short of just mind-boggling in my opinion.
Couldn't
so
agree
what say
more.
you?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. He's just been on a tear ever since the first race. It's amazing how
Yes.
you're watching him drive and you're thinking you're looking at a veteran. I mean, he's not making,
Yeah.
for the most part, he's not making really stupid mistakes like a lot of the rookies do. And he's really he paces himself. He's patient and he doesn't get flustered very easily. Whereas a lot of the other rookies get flustered very, very quickly, which is, I mean, it's first year in, you're trying to make sure and secure your seat for next year. And he's just hitting it on all cylinders, so just phenomenal work by him.
Yes, just absolutely. Just incredible. So, all the accolades that, Toto Wolff gave to him, leading up to the season and, especially after his, sprint pole was just, amazing. So, and well-deserved.
Oh,
So,
100%, yeah.
but, like you said, and for the most part, he has looked like a veteran. He has definitely looked like the class of the rookie field for sure.
Oh,
And he's
not even a
definitely,
close second.
no. And and on top of that, he's even outshining some veterans,
Yeah.
which is just nothing short of amazing. So
Yep.
I'm just good on him. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to take and talk about is not the race itself, but the pre-race, in the fact that we had Lego provided 10 copies of each of the team's race cars built out of Legos. So we had each car consisted of 400,000 bricks that took 26 engineers and designers over 22,000 hours to construct.
It's
And these
crazy.
cars were actually
Yeah.
weren't just static
Yeah.
displays, because Lego has built some static displays, because they'll have like a particular model of a car, and then they will take and that they'll sell, but then they will take and build an exact replica of it, life size. So I mean, made out of literally hundreds of thousands of bricks and everything, but there'll be like static displays. But these cars were actually drivable. They actually had two seats, so both drivers could sit in the car together, and one behind the other. And they used these for the parade laps, which got kind of spirited. And the drivers looked like they were having just an absolute blast. Now the cars weren't very fast; they only went 20 kilometers per hour,
Yeah, still,
or
yeah.
about what, 16 miles per hour, 15, 16 miles per
Yeah.
hour.
Yeah.
But they were out there,
Yeah.
a little bumping and everything. I mean, it would just look like they were just having an
Oh
absolute
yeah.
blast.
No doubt about it. I would have,
And my
that's
thought
so
was
cool.
is that maybe instead of having sprints each weekend, maybe that's what they should do, is they should start having a pre-race.
Yeah.
Before the main Grand Prix, they should have another race where both drivers climb into the Lego cars, and they actually have a race in those, as opposed to doing the sprint
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
races.
God, that would be so funny.
That would definitely be way more entertaining, in my opinion. The story of the weekend in Miami was primarily just the McLaren dominance, because even though Antonelli took a brilliant pole in the sprint, he made, an uncharacteristic mistake, slid back in the order, and Lando takes and leads home Piastri in the sprint race. And then we had Verstappen, pulls out a brilliant pole, for the race, but then Piastri gets him, very early on, and then a late charging Lando, so we wind up with another McLaren 1-2 with Piastri, followed by Lando. So it was just another weekend of maximum points for the
Mhm.
McLaren team, and just a dominance by the drivers. So your thoughts on the McLaren dominance, or is this just something you're starting to begin to expect for the 2025?
Yeah, it's funny because besides this last race at Imola, um, it's very similar to when Max was winning all those races. It's just kind of like an accepted fact of the that year that he was going to win, and now it's starting to become kind of a de facto, not if McLaren's going to place, but if it's going to be Piastri or Norris.
Yes.
Which order are they going to be in? That's really the question now.
Yeah. The only real difference between that and, like say 2023, when, Red Bull won
Mhm.
all but, two races that year, it's unlike then, with the exception of the early, strong showing by Checo, he faded very badly during the last
Yeah.
part of the year. So it really just became kind of a matter of, can anybody beat Max? Whereas now it's like you've got two drivers at McLaren in Piastri and Lando,
Yep.
that are so close to each other that it's just really a matter of who gets the better setup, or who gets the slightly, better edge, maybe in
Hmm.
the pit stops or something, that gives them just that tiny little edge that gives them the victory, as opposed to finishing in second place. And it's just that's really about but like you said, that's about the only difference, is that you
Yeah.
just every weekend you expect McLaren to show up and be, just dominant over everybody else,
Yeah.
which is both good for McLaren, good for, fans of McLaren, but maybe we're kind of looking at kind of another, yawner of a season like we did in 2023. But then again, after, after Verstappen's win this weekend at Imola, which we'll get to in a few minutes, maybe, Red Bull's, unlike what
Yeah.
we have predicted, maybe Red Bull's maybe finally starting to turn that corner. And we'll talk more about that
Yeah.
here in just a minute. All right, so the last thing that came out is shortly after the Miami Grand Prix, we got the news that the team principal was stepping down, and that our wonderful cheater in charge, one Mr. Flavio Briatore, was going to, at least for the foreseeable future, take over the role of team principal at Renault, or not Renault, at Alpine, which, pardon my, faux pas there. But I mean, who didn't see this coming when they announced that Briatore was being reappointed to Alpine
We
as
all knew.
the general manager? We all knew that it wasn't going to be long before he was
Mm-mm.
going to be calling the shots on race day. I mean, was anybody surprised here?
Most likely he's been calling the shots for a while. He's the, it, it, there's so many bad problems with him taking over. Alpine's one of those that now is just, to me, it's just disheartening that they allow somebody like him in F1, especially at that level. At first it was just managing drivers, which okay, he can't do too much damage there, but now he's actually in F1. He's managing a team. He's calling the shots. He's signing drivers to 5 race deals, which is insane. It's
Mm-hmm.
just, yeah, it's not a good day, I think, for F1.
So shortly after we get the news that Oliver had resigned from his role as team principal, we also get the news that Bortoleto is in and Duhan is out at Alpine. So after only 5 races, so far this season, we've already seen two quote unquote rookies. Liam Lawson really couldn't be considered a true rookie, but he was still, because he hadn't run a full race season, we're still going to
Yeah.
refer to him as a rookie.
Yep.
But we've already got 2 rookies that have already been axed, that one has lost his seat altogether, and the other one got demoted, much like we said would happen at the beginning of the season.
Yep.
But the other thing is, though, is that the fact that Calapinto has only been signed for 5 races, and if he doesn't do any better than Duhan, what are they going to do? Are they going to put Duhan back in? Are they going to find yet a third
Yeah.
driver?
Right.
I mean, me personally, I can remember the days where a lot of the teams were running quote unquote paid drivers, where they might have, the team might have, one driver that would see out the entire season as the number one driver, but then the second driver would often be based upon, maybe 3 or 4 races, based upon how much money they could take and they could give the team for, to get that seat for a few races and stuff. But we hadn't really seen that as much over the last few years in Formula One. But now that we're starting, and we're still, it's really not a situation of paid drivers, but the fact that we're seeing, these, driver swaps after only, a handful of races, to me is really, really disheartening for what's going on over at Alpine. And it's like, is this more of, Briatore's, mind games, or, because we saw it in Drive to Survive, he handpicked Doohan to take the seat, and why all of a sudden the sudden loss of confidence, and the fact that he's already been booted. So I've gone on
Yeah,
long
but
enough. Your thoughts?
there was rumors even before the season started that they didn't want Duhan in, so it it seemed like that they were just waiting for that one thing to go ahead and kick him out and get Colapinto in, which I don't. You need to give your drivers a little bit more time. I don't understand what's happening over at Alpine. Besides Briatore being in charge, it makes no sense at all. I mean, have you ever in the history of, since you've been a fan, have you ever seen somebody be signed for 5 races?
Well, yeah, like I was just saying, I can remember, once upon a time back when, some of these teams that were
Besides, I mean, but
struggling.
like full time, you know what I mean?
Yes, full
Not
time. Yeah. No, I have never seen, a sudden, swap like that, just for the sake of making the swap. I've seen
right.
it, done because this driver's run out of money, this
Yeah,
driver
yeah, yeah.
has money,
Right.
this driver's going to take the
But there's a
car, he
rationale
can
behind it.
afford, 4 races. So we're going to, the next 4 races, he's going to be in the
Hmm.
car. And then when he runs out of money, we'll find some other driver, or something like that.
Yeah.
But I've never seen, contract drivers, especially a driver that was already contracted to Mercedes and contracted to the Williams team as a reserve driver. And now he is in the Alpine, which is, Alpine uses Alpine power units. So there's no connection there other than the fact that Alpine is going to be using Mercedes power units starting in 2026. But right now, there's no connection beyond that. And so this has been just a really, really weird situation all
Yeah.
the way around. And it's left even me just scratching my head on
Yeah.
what the F is going on here.
Yep. I it makes no sense, but we're just gonna have to see what the next four races now are gonna put it in store for Alpine. It just
Yes.
it's insanity to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that in mind, let's move on to this last weekend at Imola. What we came here to talk about it, this week anyway. All right. So my first question to you is Max, pulled off an absolutely brilliant move in at Tamburello on the opening lap during the race and swept around Oscar Piastri, did it in perfect style. He could not have
Mhm.
executed that pass any better. And it was just nothing short of amazing to begin with. So, my question to you is now that I've gone on way, way too long, my question is what do you think this win does for Max and for Red Bull in the wider scheme of things for the drivers and the constructors championship? Do you think that they're back in it?
You know, I know we said a few weeks ago that it's one race, and that one race really didn't profile the car very much. It really profiled the driver. Whereas this race really showed that Red Bull's car was really fast. There's, right after the safety car, when Piastri was right behind Max, Piastri couldn't catch him. And that
Mm-mm.
wasn't being that much better of a driver. That was the car. So I think that McLaren, Norris and Piastri have been used to having just a rocket ship of a car and nobody able to catch them. Whereas now with Max and Red Bull having a much faster car, whatever upgrades that they brought, I think really have changed the game for Red Bull.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I could not agree more in the fact that, it's, because he's threatening for, pole. And we knew from the beginning of the season, we knew that the Red Bull was good for one lap. It was really good in qualifying trim, but once, as we saw in a couple of the races, the car wasn't as strong over a race distance. But it's just through the sheer brilliance of Max Verstappen was the only
Yeah.
reason why he was able to pull off that fantastic win at
Yep.
Japan. But we saw it, him drop back, in race trim at Jeddah. So it's like it's been kind of up and down and uneven and stuff. But so I think the next 2 or 3 races are going to really tell the story of if we continue to see kind of that seesaw of, one weekend they're really good, one weekend they're kind of mediocre,
Yep.
but if they continue to look as strong as they have this as they did this last weekend at Imola and like they did at um at Japan and at Miami, we might be able to say that yes, Max and Red Bull are going to keep it from being a ho hum season.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be interesting at the very least. If they can keep up at least the performance end of it.
Yes.
And now Max really can't exercise that clause if that clause is actually really there. If he drops beyond third, then he can go somewhere else. So
Yep.
Red
So
Bull
we'll
has a
see.
vested interest. They have to get something done. Yeah, we'll see exactly. You're right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's gonna be very, very interesting to see. So I know I had this further down on the show notes for today, but as long as we're talking about Red Bull, we've got to talk about the other side of the garage. So our Yuki Watch 2025, um, this was very this was a really weird weekend for Yuki. He was very up and down during practice. It was like during FP1, he was, I think 16th fastest. During FP3, he was 17th fastest, but then he dropped up and was eighth on FP2,
Yeah.
and then he takes and has the horrendous
Yeah.
shunt during Q1 on qualifying. There was really a scary, scary accident because the way that the car flipped and everything brought out the red flag and everything. So he has to start from the pole, or I'm sorry, he has to start not from the pole. He has to start from the pit lane,
Yeah.
but then
Because
he takes and he storms from dead last, starting in
mhm.
the pit lane to still, finish 10th and get a point.
Yeah.
So very up and down weekend for him. But I don't know. I think that maybe I don't know exactly what upgrades that Red Bull brought this weekend were actually on Yuki's car. I could not find anything that said that both cars were running all of the upgrades. So it's
Right.
like I'm kind of wondering if maybe he was missing one or two things that was throwing off the balance and stuff. And so as
Sure.
they were trying to tweak it over FP. So your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought I remember seeing something that he didn't get the floor upgrade, but he got a couple of other upgrades. So there was definitely some variances between the two. Um, so yeah, it's but that's Yuki being able to drive as well as he was able to. I mean, coming
Yeah.
from the pit lane all the way up to 10th place is amazing because the people he had to pass were not, horrible drivers. These are top of the
No.
line drivers.
Oh yeah. And some of those passes were just
Oh
absolutely
yeah,
brilliant.
no
They
doubt
were
about it.
just flipping brilliant.
Yeah,
Right. So the other thing too, though, is that Williams also had another
yeah,
really, really strong weekend in the fact that, they both qualified in the top 10. Both made it to, both Albon and Sainz made it to Q3. Both had just absolutely brilliant qualifyings. Carlos Sainz takes and out qualifies Albon for the second, race weekend in a row. They had, a really, really good race in the fact that Albon finishes fifth and Sainz finishes eighth. So another big haul of points for
yep.
Williams. So, your thoughts on Williams and their form from this last weekend?
Yeah, I'm continually be amazed. I love to see this story play out. Williams is really looking very strong. Sainz is starting to look more comfortable in the car. Albon
Mm-hmm.
is finally able to do what he can do in a car that's suiting his abilities. So I love to see this.
Yes. No, I could not agree more. And the fact that both of them, had really, really strong weekends. The car has looked really, really solid. It's like the team seems to be firing on all cylinders. They are definitely the class of, the midfield, not just by a little bit, but by a
Yeah,
bunch.
right,
And,
right.
I would say that they might even be starting to creep up and start to knocking on the back door of the top four. I
Yeah,
don't think they're quite there yet. And the fact that they have decided not to really put a lot more development into the car for this year so that they can focus their efforts on 2026. I do see them probably sliding back a little bit, but I just think the car is so far ahead of everybody
yeah,
else in the midfield, at least,
right.
that it's going to be really hard for, the other midfield teams to catch up to them because a lot of them are going to be in the same boat.
Yeah,
They're not going to want to spend a lot of time and money, on this year's car when they can put those resources towards next year's car.
yep. Yeah, I'm looking at it now. So Williams is fifth place at 51 points right now as in the constructors. Up from them is actually Ferrari at 114 points. So
Hmm.
not very close there, but the one behind them in six is Haas at 20 points. So
Yes.
they are in a really, really good spot right now. As
I
you
think
said, they're
they
leading the midfield.
Yes. And not just by a little bit. Like I said, they are head and shoulders above the rest of the midfield.
Yep. Yep.
On the flips, you mentioned Ferrari a minute ago. So Lewis, well, first of all, we got to talk about Ferrari's qualifying. They had an absolutely
Yeah.
disastrous qualifying
Yeah.
by, just by pretty much any standard that you could look at. In the fact that they qualified 11th and 12th, and they both got bounced in Q2,
Yeah.
which is the first time that that's happened for Ferrari in quite a long time. And so then the race became all about damage control and damage mitigation. And so your thoughts, first of all, on qualifying for them.
Yeah, qualifying, my heart broke for them, because this is one of the races that, they really want to nail, and just it did not look pretty at all for them. For them at least, I was not looking forward to the race, but they kind of put it back.
They definitely put it back. I mean, like I said, they were definitely in damage control mode after, such a disastrous qualifying. But,
Yeah,
the fact that, for coming from, 11th and 12th on the grid for, Charles Leclerc to finish in sixth, and then Hamilton, who is looking more and more comfortable in the car
yeah, yeah,
at times. There are still times like during FP1, he looked really uncomfortable, and he was complaining a lot about the balance of the car and things like that in FP1. But by FP2, he started to look more confident. And in the race, he takes and he has just an absolutely phenomenal race. Ends up fourth, his best finish yet to date for Ferrari. And the fact that he was only, what, 2.5, 3 seconds off
yeah,
of Piastri at the end. I mean, a couple more laps, and he might have
yeah.
been challenging for, because he was coming on strong,
Podium.
he might have been challenging for a podium,
Yeah, yeah,
which,
yeah. He was just over 2 seconds, or
yeah.
just under 2 seconds. Yeah,
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like, he is definitely I think, we talked about it, a number of times already this season about how, in this day and age with the limited testing and everything, that it takes time for drivers when they're changing teams to come to terms with the car. And like we talked about with, Sainz looking much more comfortable at Williams, Lewis is starting to look a lot more comfortable at Ferrari. And I think that he and his race engineer are finally starting to speak the same language, if you will. I know Lewis, learned Italian, in order to come to Ferrari, and maybe, his Italian is finally getting good enough that he can actually like communicate a little better with his race engineers. Your thoughts?
right. Yeah, Lewis is finally, getting there. I was really hoping this was going to be the case, and again, it's been one or two races that he looks really comfortable, so we'll give it a little bit more time. But man, he looks really good. It's really exciting and really encouraging that not only him but the team is actually starting to look good now too. So earlier on they were suffering from the woes of Ferrari, but now they're starting to get it looking gelling at least.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so the next thing, real quick, is we talked about Antonelli and his just absolutely phenomenal lap at Miami to take the sprint pole. This weekend was the first quote unquote home race for Antonelli because he actually is from Bologna, which is, I think I read somewhere that it's only like 50 or 60 miles from San Marino, where Imola is at. And so it was really kind of a home race. And you could kind of tell over the course of the weekend that some of the pressures of it being his home race, you could tell he wasn't quite as mentally sharp, throughout the weekend and everything, that there were times where he looked, a little out of sorts.
Mm.
I kind of chalk that up to youthful exuberance and not so much as as any kind of mistakes or anything. And the fact that, he didn't even finish the race, but that was a mechanical issue. He lost the
Yep.
throttle control on the car.
Yep.
So nothing that he did. So, again, I thought it was another good weekend for Antonelli. It was a good weekend for Mercedes. But I really, he still didn't really step anything wrong. He just didn't quite look as sharp. Your thoughts?
Yeah, same here, man. maybe it was a track, maybe it was unfamiliarity, but yeah, he just looked. There's just something off about his driving, at least on this race.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. So but I definitely think that, by, next weekend, going into Monaco, it's a track that, I mean, he has raced there before, in
Yeah,
FP, in F2 and stuff.
right.
Both he and Berman had, really good races last year in F2. So I think that, coming back to the Principality, he's going to look, um, I think he'll, be back much more back on form for the
Yeah,
next race.
yeah, agreed. And who knows? Maybe some of that actually was the car too, because he did get a DNF, so maybe it
Yeah.
was the car as
And
well.
Russell didn't look great this weekend either. He had a
Yeah,
pretty good qualifying, but he slid back during the race and everything. So
yep. He,
I just don't think the Mercedes was quite up to snuff this weekend.
yeah. So whatever upgrades everybody else did, it seems like Mercedes just didn't keep up because man, they've been looking really, really solid throughout the year, and now this is kind of a maybe they're holding steady and everybody else is starting to pass them. You know what I mean?
I don't know so much that everybody's passing them. I just, so much as it was just, because different teams bring different upgrades at
Yep,
different
yep.
times of the year and stuff. And you see this kind of seesaw back and forth between the teams. And I think this was just one of those weekends where the other teams brought upgrades that kind of pushed them ahead a little bit. And we'll probably see kind of a different story by the time we get to Monaco this weekend. Last thing from this weekend, though, is the other real surprise this weekend was the qualifying performance of Aston Martin. We had talked about, a couple weeks ago about how bad, or not bad, but how Aston Martin seemed to have, lost the thread a little bit with this season, and we had speculated, how much of it was, the fact that, you know, Newey wasn't putting any input into this
Yeah.
car, and then all of his focus was towards next year. Maybe that was part of the reason why the car had dropped off a little bit. But then lo and behold,
And
Aston Martin brought a raft of upgrades this
yeah.
weekend, and they had just an absolutely brilliant qualifying.
Yeah.
We got Fernando fifth, and for the first time this season, Lance Stroll not only got out of Q1, but he got all the way to Q3 and
Yeah.
ends up qualifying eighth with a very,
Right.
very respectable time.
Yeah, it was shocking to see because, like you said, I was more prepared to see them back in the field just because of where they are and, from a development standpoint. But yeah, with all these upgrades, they looked really competitive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at least ways in qualifying trim. Now, during the race, they did slide back a little bit. We got and part of that was, yes, we had the hard charging Yuki, blitzing through the field, which pushed him back. So for Alonso ends up finishing 11th and Stroll ends up finishing 15th, again, out of the points and everything, another weekend with no points or anything for them. But in qualifying trim, they looked really, really good. And I'm
Yeah,
kind of hoping that, this is a sign of, better things to come for them.
I wholeheartedly agree. I would love to see them up in the field getting points.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Let's see them start scoring a few more
Yeah,
points and start getting them back up there. So, but then again, part of it, me also says that maybe they're, kind of like, Williams has already said that they're not going to be, bringing a lot more development. Maybe Aston Martin is really focusing more of their efforts towards next year's car, and maybe they're kind of hoping to fall a little further back in the field, because what they're looking at is the difference in the offset between the money that they would gain by having a higher placing in the constructors versus all of the extra wind tunnel and CFD time that they would be able to take and hand to Adrian Newey for next year's car. And I wonder,
yeah,
how much of it is that balancing act between trying to figure out, the cost benefit
yeah.
of, you know, less money, more wind tunnel time versus, more money type thing. So
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah,
We
interesting.
shall
I didn't think
see.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we'll definitely see if we see another strong qualifying from Aston Martin this weekend. I think that maybe, they're finally getting a handle on this year's car more so than
Yeah.
it's them kind of trying to quote unquote tank to get that
Yeah.
extra development time.
Right. Right.
All right, so a couple of other things that beyond the race this weekend. So the first thing is that I know this is a Formula One podcast. We mostly talk about Formula One, but I have to talk about this because it is such a great story in the fact that Prima Racing, which is a European team that has been operating in the lower formulas for over 40 years, and this team has produced literally dozens of champions across F2, F3, F3000, and this team has been around for a long time and they have produced a lot of champions and they've had a number of their driver lineups are literally a who's who of top level motor racing. So this year Prima has decided to take and join the ranks of IndyCar. And so they have a two-car team over in IndyCar. And this weekend, for qualifying for the Indy 500, not only did they take and place very, very well, but in Robert Schwartzman, a rookie, they put their car on the pole ahead of much more established teams. And what makes it even more amazing is the fact that most of the team had never even seen an oval track before, let alone raced on one. Schwartzman, who qualified on the pole as a rookie, had never raced on an oval before.
Wow.
And they even missed the first day of practice because the car wasn't prepared yet. They didn't even start running until the second day. And he goes out and puts it on pole. He's the first rookie to be on pole for the Indy 500 in over 40 years. And I just
That's
thought it was an
amazing.
amazing
Yeah, that
story.
really is.
So I had to share it for everybody this week, and so many claps to Prima Racing. Again, they're just showing just what a class act that team has been, not just now, but for the last 40 years. So good on them.
Yeah, right, 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 right.
Okay, and so real quick, we have to raise a glass to F1, which last Tuesday, when we were supposed to record our podcast for Miami, F1 turned 75. So it was their official birthday, from the first race at Silverstone back in 1950. So cheers to F1.
Right on. 75 years, man.
Yep, 75 years. Ah, that makes me feel old. I've been watching for the full 75 years, but I've
Yeah.
been watching for over 40 of it. So,
Wow, yeah.
I remember, back when I started watching when they were talking about the 25-year anniversary.
Wow, nice. Yeah.
Actually, I guess it would have been the 35th anniversary.
Mm,
So, yeah, but still, regardless.
yeah.
Okay. So, the last thing that we're going to take, we're going to drop the other item. And the last thing that we're going to take and we're going to talk about this weekend is there are rumblings that Carlos Sainz Sr., father of Carlos Sainz Jr., who drives for Williams and who is a two-time rallying champion, is looking at possibly running against Ben Salim for president of the FIA.
Good.
And I just wanted to get your thoughts on it.
I I would think that that would be fantastic if he won. The policies that he's put in place, Ben Al Salim, has just been draconian, has been juvenile. Take your pick of adjectives. It just kind of really not understanding what drivers are and who they are, for the most part. So I would very much welcome Carlos Jr. or Carlos Sr. To Carlos Sainz Sr. to take that seat as president. I would love to see what he can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would be a fantastic to see that happen. So I mean, I know some people have said that they think that they worry about a conflict of interest there, but I don't see it. If anything, because the FIA doesn't just oversee Formula One, they oversee literally dozens of racing series from rallying to endurance cars to
Mhm.
sports cars to
Yeah,
to Formula One.
right, right.
Just because his one son is racing in Formula One does not mean that he's going to have a conflict of interest with all
Yep.
of the other series of
Right.
racing that falls underneath their umbrella. And
Exactly.
so but I'm like you. I think that Ben has done F1 and literally has done the FIA no
Yeah.
favors. And I really think that, it's time for some fresh blood in
Yep.
there as the president.
Yeah.
So
Agreed.
I'm all for it.
The same here, man.
Yep. All right. So I think we've talked enough for today. What do you think?
Think so, man. I think
All
so.
right then. Okay, so thanks for riding along with us on another week of F1 Brake Check. Corey and I will be back next week with our recap of the action from the Principality of Monaco, and all the usual suspects will be here. Until then, he's Corey. I'm Scott. We're the pundits of F1 Brake Check. Let's go!
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher, or you can watch the video version on YouTube. Help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.